Welcome, everyone, to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, your weekly podcast for software sales professionals who want to sell better. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, make Software Sales Simplified your go-to podcast for all the latest and greatest in developments in the world of enterprise software sales. It's been a while, but we're back. I'm Kevin Dunville. I'm one of your hosts today, and I'm joined by my illustrious colleague, Matt Long. Together, Matt and I have over 50 years experience in enterprise software sales, and we're going to be bringing that into this podcast to share with our guests who are coming on to share their perspective, their history, and some of their experiences so that you can learn from them and become a better seller. But before we get too deep into today's episode, I want to remind you to take a moment to please like, subscribe, follow, comment on the podcast that you're listening to on whatever platform it is that you're listening to us on. And that would be extremely helpful for us to the algorithms that they use for making these more popular. And in today's topic, we're going to be talking about something that's pretty interesting, a little bit different from what we've talked about before. We have been gone for a while, right, Matt?
We have. I'm actually joining you from lovely Waikiki as we speak. And if you have to ask yourself, where do people from Hawaii go on vacation? We go to the big city. So that's Honolulu for me. So I've been here 2 weeks. I'm enjoying just the nightlife and restaurants open past 9 and all the other things we kind of miss on our sleepy island. But I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, and it's great to have you back. It's great to be back. Summertime's when a lot of people are taking breaks. So between the breaks that we needed to take and many of our guests needed to take, we took a little sabbatical over the course of the summer, but we're really glad to be back. And today we're going to be talking about some unique subjects we've not talked about on the show before. We're going to be exploring leadership and growth, technical depth being relevant in more than one way with the guests we're going to be talking about today. From that perspective, talking about how diving and demoing might have more in common than you might think. In order to dive into, shall we say, those topics, we're joined by my good friend and colleague and former coworker, Priyanta Dharmasena. Sir, it is so good to have you on the call today. You are a man of many talents and almost a myth and a legend in the pre-sales industry with your expertise, not only in selling and in pre-sales leadership, but also your phenomenal background in diving as well. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, and thank you for having me here today.
Well, we're very happy to have you. Now, obviously, you and I have been friends for a good long time. You've been instrumental in the development of my career and my perspective as being a pre-sales leader. But obviously, our guests don't know you. So please take a moment, take the floor, and tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, your professional history, and a little bit about your diving background.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, Priyanta Dharmasena. I'm originally from England, and I was born, grew up there, went to school there, university, etc. Moved to the US with a small company nobody ever heard of back then, or actually had heard by that point, called Oracle Corporation. And when I first joined, nobody in England had ever heard of Oracle, but that was back in the 80s, but we're not going to go too far into the past here. But I spent a good 10 years with Oracle. It helped define my career and kind of really get me on the road to technology and kind of understanding how enterprise technical sales worked. Then I took a leap and ended up in the CRM industry working for Tom Seibel at Seibel Systems back in the day when there were less than 400 people in the company. It grew to 8,000. So I had a phenomenal ride there, just as I did with Oracle. Learned a lot along the way. Left there and then took a year off. I felt I needed a break. It had been a good half of my career at that point almost, so it was time to actually take a step back, and my wife and I actually got to go away and do some interesting things, which was good. Came back and joined a couple of startups, actually, because I didn't want to move back into CRM. A lot of people I knew had gone from Seibel into Salesforce. I learned a lot with the startups over about 3 years, but then eventually went to Salesforce, where I primarily went not so much for the CRM, but for the platform, and used the platform a lot while I was there, and I spent 15 years there. Since leaving there, I've moved completely from the track away from CRM and moved into security and privacy, which is a very important topic given how much data we all share today.
Absolutely.
And spent so far 2 years there as a solution architect, working on building out a whole new segment of the industry and helping people understand why protecting data is important, because probably you, just as much as me, are probably fed up of receiving notices from companies saying, hey, we've leaked your personal information. And you then think, okay, now what do I need to do to make sure that everything's secure? So that's kind of a brief potted history of me over the decades.
So clearly not a very busy person, haven't done much, and you're still pushing boundaries. I understand you just undertook a new undertaking just recently. What is it you're undertaking now? It's related to your current role in the organization you're with. At least there's some professional alignment there. Share that with our audience.
Absolutely. It's actually, I'm about 2/3 of the way into it, but I am definitely in it, so to speak. Started a new module recently, but I decided more than anything else to see if I was capable of doing it at this stage of my career, doing a master's degree. And when you're working at a startup company, it can be somewhat challenging to actually balance all of the workload that you have for your startup and find time to do studying and reading as well of research papers and everything else. The master's degree was in an area I thought, well, this should be challenging. Or as a friend of mine said, you just had to pick a hard topic. You just couldn't opt for something simple. So I opted for a master's degree in cybersecurity, which is obviously tangential to security overall, but it's proved to be very, very illuminating in terms of my understanding of the security industry, and then now being able to have discussions with people like CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and then understand firsthand exactly what they're talking about when they're talking about it, even though my colleagues may not, and being able to pick up on nuances and understand where they're trying to go with the business, how they're trying to protect things. So yes, it's been very fulfilling for me to actually see, after many decades of not studying, to actually go back into full-time studying again, albeit remotely. And it's helped enrich my career as well.
I can well imagine how challenging that must be, but it doesn't surprise me, given your background and what I know about you, that if you're going to dive in, you dive in. And along those lines, I mean, we kind of alluded to this earlier on, because you and I have been friends for a long time. We're both avid divers. You're way more technically advanced than I am on the diving field. But a number of times over the course of our conversations, when we've caught up with each other just to have those quick chats about where are you with your career and so forth, we've often alluded to that there are some similarities between the whole thing about the skills we picked up for diving, the discipline of diving, and what we do on a regular day-to-day life with respect to delivering from a pre-sales perspective. So what have you learned? I mean, obviously there's a lot of pressure with high-end technical diving. You're an instructor. What have you learned in that you've been able to apply towards enterprise?
I guess I should interrupt right here just really quickly. When we're speaking diving, we're talking about scuba diving, not high diving with Speedos. Is that correct?
Correct.
Completely 100%.
Just want to make that clear to our listeners.
There's a visual
right
about
visual.
myself I didn't need. Yeah, exactly. The visual I did not need about myself. Yes, we're talking about scuba diving.
All right.
Pri, go ahead and I don't want to misrepresent the level of diving you're at. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and how you've been able to apply those things towards your day-to-day enterprise selling?
That's a great question. I've been diving now for over 30 years. About the first 10 years was more recreational diving. I did a lot of diving. I was thinking about getting into the professional side of things, becoming a dive master back in the 90s, never did. But I eventually did. When I took my year off, I managed to become a dive master, went professional, and then a year later became an instructor. And now 20 years on from that, I'm a master instructor, and I can actually assist and teach portions of the instructor development course. We develop out new instructors, and I primarily do that to pass on my knowledge, but also to help develop people's understanding of the oceans and why it's important to protect them. Where that actually falls into line with something like software and how it helps, I think it's very simple, because, when we teach people to dive, one of the things we teach them to do is actually focus on the basics. Have you done your buddy checks? Have you turned your air on? Can you breathe from it? Do you have sufficient air in your jacket before you dive in the ocean? Do you have all your equipment with you? So focusing on the basics is really important. It's also very important from a sales perspective as well, whether it's technical sales or otherwise. It's like, how do we understand the customer requirements? Do we understand exactly what they're trying to do? What is our value to them? How does this solution fit in what we're trying to do? Are we a good fit or are we not a good fit? Should we be going after this or not going after this? For example, if you're on a dive, do I really want to go into that wreck? Or is it going to be really dangerous if I do, and I'm going to put myself in danger in terms of doing that? It's about making good decisions in a way, but also not forgetting the basics. Just because we've been doing something for decades and decades and decades, and we're really good at it, and we have a lot of experience, does not mean that we can all of a sudden forget about all of the basics. As you will well know from your many years of doing martial arts, You never forget the basics. It's the core on top of which you build everything based around knowledge and expertise. So, for the example is, making sure that people do the basics, but also from a instructional perspective, where I'm actually looking at students and teaching students sometimes, it's actually getting them to understand the basics of what you need to do to be able to do that and how you apply that in sales situations that becomes important. So that's the trade-off, is passing those skills off, but also making people focus on the basics to make sure you have those before you start doing something more elaborate.
You hit on a couple of really key points there. So there's a lot of technical considerations that need to take place, both with yourself and also with the broader team that you're going to be diving with at any one given time. And to your point, that extends over into the technical world of doing technical sales and doing demos and things of that nature. And the consequences of getting any of those answers wrong can be dramatic and be traumatic with respect to just assuming any of those. That discipline of really understanding, is this the real answer? Is this the correct answer? And does this reflect the reality of the situation? Have I taken everything into consideration with respect to how I've given that answer? But that kind of ties into an interesting thing. You and I were talking a couple of days ago, and we were comparing notes about technical skills, not in diving in this case, but talking about that in our professional careers as being sales engineers and being sales engineering leaders. How do you stay sharp? Here you are, you're going back into school, you're learning all these new things. How does one stay sharp technically without pulling themselves out of the day-to-day? And because there's two areas of leading. You mentioned this before. There's technical leading, and then there's leading of people. So you're either managing people or you're managing opportunities. So you're either a player coach or you're a people manager. But there's consequences, right, with respect to giving up one over the other. What would you say some of those are?
That's really good. I can actually speak to that directly because I've been all of those. I've been a individual contributor, and I'm still an individual contributor out of choice, because I'm actually controlling my career and not letting anyone else control how I want to do and what I enjoy doing. But I've also been a manager. I've managed, very large teams, actually a director, and managed very large teams and had to manage managers as well. And the two are very, very different. And it really depends, I think, quite honestly, and we talked about this as well, is that what do you want from your career and how do you want to grow your career and where do you want to be? And one of the things there is that a lot of organizations, when they say, great, we want to know how you want to grow, we want to know where you're going to move to, and there's that constant push to actually move to the next level. But I don't feel that enough is actually necessarily done, or people focus enough on, is this the right path for me to take? Because as soon as you take on management responsibility, it's not about telling people how you did your job really well and telling them how to do their job. You need to actually look at them as individuals. They have lives, they have families, they have kids in some cases as well. You need to take all of that into account, because you are literally managing people and you're managing their whole life expectations. And life can be tough out there in the software industry in terms of how companies are actually keeping people or not retaining people these days. So you need to take that into account. But from a technical skills perspective as well, and I found this, was the fact that when I went into management, I soon found that, as we are in the software industry, things move very, very quickly. You need to constantly be learning and adapting and staying up with the latest changes to understand what customers want, how you actually position your products, how you actually need to change the messaging and selling and the value behind them. And if the longer you spend in management, the further away you get from that. Some people are very happy with that, because some people are not very comfortable at the sharp end of technology. So for them, it's nice to actually get away from that. But then you kind of got to think about your own career progression as well. As that, most companies, when they hire, they don't hire management externally most of the time. They actually promote from within. And because they promote from within, it makes it harder for you to come in, because you're coming into a culture elsewhere. So will they necessarily embrace you as you come in the door? And from my perspective, I recognize that over my period of almost a decade of managing, as I went out there and looking externally, it's very, very hard to find those positions. They're looking for people who have active skills, typically technically, could be also business related and sales related, is also important. And you and I both understand that from the perspective that we can be technical one day, we can be business oriented the other day, and we can move along that spectrum. A lot of people are not like that, so they need to focus on where their skill development needs to be, quite honestly. And I found that I quickly realized that, your ability to grow your career beyond your current company is actually limited by how well engaged you are with the latest technologies that are coming out. So today, how au fait are you with terms like NER or in terms of in terms of name density recognition as part of NLP, or in terms of the different types of AI models that you can actually have, and what a RAG, how do you actually do RAG generation of new AI models to actually take content, consume it, and put it in. All these terms are suddenly erupted over the last 18 months, and everybody's trying to keep pace with it. And the more you can actually do that, the more up to date you can stay. And when you stay more up to date, in my own personal opinion anyway, the more attractive you are to various companies that come out and look for you, because you've not only just shown that you have a good, firm understanding of the concepts of today and why these things are applied, but also go beyond that to say, I was here, I have all these other skills as well, which I can now bring into play as well. So it's kind of a long answer to your question, but I think, the long and the short comes down to, what do people really want to do, number one, and then kind of number two, are you comfortable with, in terms of growing, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to move into a managed position. You can stay there, but you need to look to the organization you're with to actually be able to support you along that path, so you're not stagnant, because as soon as we become stagnant, we want to change and we want to move.
Yeah, I think it's a relevant topic across all aspects of sales. We see it with sales managers all the time, where a person who's really wonderful, individual contributor and rep is all of a sudden promoted, right? And then just doesn't have the same skills, because what you're trying to do there is coach your team. And as you mentioned, each one is individual. And the best managers I've had were the ones that were able to individually provide what was needed to get the best out of each person, right? And that's a skill that not everyone has. I think we've all been in that role as well. I've been, a leader at some point and gone back to individual contributor, as Kevin, you have as well, and you have also. But I'm just curious, it was always difficult, I think, to figure out how much do you need to stay plugged in to the changes in technology, and how much are you relying upon your stars and your team to go that route, right? And I think there was always a fine line between getting just too much into the managerial state, yet also, realizing that you're not going to be able to stay on top of everything. How have you found that to be for yourself in terms of where's that line in terms of staying on abreast of everything that's coming technology-wise, but also being able to lead your team accordingly?
There's some interesting parallels there, Matt, with how that works and how diving works from the perspective of how you make decisions. And I think it comes down to decisions that you need to make and priorities that you need to actually set. And the knowledge stuff, I think, comes down to what, Mark Benioff at Salesforce said once upon a time, is that, the best mindset to have is a beginner's mind. So the pot is empty, you can fill it up, and you can actually keep growing rather than the pot is full and there's no more room in there to actually take anything on board anymore. And I think it's really resonated with me even all those years ago. And it kind of goes back, if you kind of read through philosophy and different areas of philosophy, how people talk about, being able to conquer others, you're mighty, being able to understand yourself, you're enlightened, for those who are into Chinese philosophy. But, but from that perspective, it rings true, because you need to kind of make that decision as to where you actually keep that balance. So do I want to be more technical? Do I want to be less technical? And actually ask yourself and be honest with yourself and ask yourself, am I actually doing the job that I really want to do here? Do I really want to be managing all these people? And as I said to Kevin, when I moved to Salesforce many years ago now, they didn't have any management positions open for me. And they said, are you really sure you're okay after all your years of managing, in terms of taking an individual contributor role? And after a year of doing it, and, the pay was good and it was getting better, and it got very, very, very good at one point, I realized that I didn't have to take on all the responsibility of managing other people within my teams, and managing all the problems they have, and all the problems of the account executives within that team. I could just focus on my accounts, my executives, maybe jump over and help somebody else if need be every now and again. And that was a decision that I made. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this. I think it's just more of making a decision that's right for the person who's making it, based on their skills, where they want their career to be, and where they want their career to grow to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it's a number of times, and I know both of you guys have led teams. I've had people on my team come up to me before and say, I really want to get into management. And my first question to them is always, why? Why do you want to get into management? Because there are certain paths you can follow when you get into becoming a team leader or a people leader. But there's also certain doors you have to close, at least while you're in that capacity and following that lead. So I always ask them, what is it you're interested in doing? And I generally feel that if their answer that they come back with is about growing other people and coming up with strategies and developing presence in the market, if their answers are developmental in origin, I think that they've got the right mindset to engage with doing something around sales leadership. If their answer is, I want to make more money, my answer to them is probably, you need to stay as an individual contributor. What are your perspectives, both of you guys? I put this question to both of you guys. What are your perspectives on people who come in with that mindset? And what are some of the doors you think that they may have to close as they go down that path?
From my perspective, I think it kind of comes back to individual circumstances that sometimes step into play. And kind of, I think you and I spoke about this, is that when I made the decision to really change, where I was going, because I was on this fast track with all the other people I know who are now all either SVPs, EVPs, or they're C-level people across companies. I would have been there as well. I made a conscious decision to move off that track. That was based on a family situation where my father had his first set of strokes, and then that was more than 20 years ago now. But it forced me to think about and reevaluate what that path needed to be. It was not so much a work-related decision. There are other things come into play here. And they're equally important, because obviously, as I found out at that point, I've been neglecting family, been neglecting personal life to a degree, because I was so overly hyper focused. And how I can be when I get really focused on something. It's like, I'm gonna make that objective, gonna make that happen, no matter what else it happens. We're gonna meet that target. And it actually forced me to take a step back and say, I can learn all the technical stuff I want. I can be the best manager director in the world, but at the end of the day, is that where I really want to go? And do I really want? And then that's what forced me to make different changes and decisions at that point, rather than just saying, I need to be a VP, I need to get to GVP, I need to get to SVP. My whole perspective changed.
So is that oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Matt. I didn't mean to step on you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a little bit. One of the other levers there, which I think you just mentioned, is the fact that when you want to grow your career, a lot of times you have to step into a manager, director role, et cetera. So a lot of people feel obligated, like this is the next step that I need to do. I do think that technical sales, though, or sales in general, you do have a lot of leeway that you can have a long career just as an individual contributor, which is pretty unique across the board in terms of other departments and organizations, et cetera. But that's always what I struggled with, is like, how much do I want to advance my career? How much do I want to grow and expand my role across these organizations? And that was always the question in my mind when I was battling with this.
Absolutely. I can see both of those perspectives pretty clearly. So the question to you then is, how much of that and what aspects of it factored into your decision? Let's use the example of you going back to school, master's degree, and following up on cybersecurity.
A personal decision. That really was not. I've been in the industry for such a long time now. I know that I can come in. I know I can do enough research around the role to be able to understand and get up to speed and become an expert in that field. So that was always going to be the case, and I was kind of proving it out anyway while I was there. It was more a personal decision of me. So when I kind of moved, moved from Salesforce. I took a little bit of time off. I felt I needed to around that point. We come through COVID, all the other things that were going on. I just need to just break away for a while. And it did actually cross my mind. It's like, am I done with technology? And am I going to go and live on a beach and teach diving for my remaining years, which is always a possibility. And we won't go into that. But primarily, I actually started really brushing up on my skills in terms of my technical skills. So I did an online course to rebrush up on Java. I learned about Python, because Python's very heavily used for developing based around AI. And it's been adopted by lots of companies. For example, if you don't know Python and you're applying for a solution engineering role at Databricks, you're not going to be considered unless you know Python. So I actually did a lot of this stuff just to educate myself on the latest technologies, brush up on my technical skills for no other reason than that. And it helps, obviously, when I went into my current role, because it is a very, very technical role compared to some of the other roles I've done over the years. But for me, it was much more about enriching myself and asking the question of myself, can I do this? At this stage of my life and this stage of my career, am I able to actually assimilate this much information? And am I able to get my brain moving? And it's all about adaptability. It's like, can I respond to situations? People face this in sales all the time. It's like somebody throws a massive problem at you. It's like you can either run for the door, or you can kind of look at it and go, you know what? That's kind of a difficult problem, but I think I can actually figure it out. But my motivation for doing it was purely, can I do it? And it has turned out to be A, very informative and very educational, but B, it has had the effect of, being able to actually provide me with that additional information it's enriched my career.
So on that front, you're in a really hot area. I mean, you did pick a tough topic, but it's a great one right now, cybersecurity. What are some of the most more fascinating and applicable aspects of cybersecurity that manifest in a day-to-day?
It's a really good question. I think if you kind of go back a little bit in terms of history, the way people have guarded things typically historically over the years is they built walls. And typically walls manifested into castles, and then it was a case of can the people outside the castle get into the castle to kind of get all the treasures out. That is basically the analogy we kind of look at in day-to-day security. The only difference is today is we use different tools to do that. So you have firewalls, you have intrusion detection and prevention systems, which you can monitor devices, so you can monitor the network to see what are people trying to do to try and break in. You can set off alarms, you can kind of be reactive, or you can be proactive about your security approaches for actually addressing these. And where I'm working right now, we focus much more on the crown jewels. It's like, how do you stop people, even if they try and take the data, from just lifting a whole bunch of nonsense, which means nothing to them, because they don't have the secure vault, which contains the keys to the kingdom, basically the token vault, to be able to translate that information. So even if they run off with your database, they run off with nothing. And one of the things that wasn't really being protected, so if you put up a wall, it's basically what you call endpoint security. You're stopping people getting in through that endpoint. Once they're in, then you got a problem. And that's what's happening with phishing attacks and things like that. You get an email, you click on it, boom. You've just let in some form of malware, which allows people to start to be able to take over or start to look at penetrating your environment, so to speak, which is why people, when you actually look at security as a holistic subject, it's not just about the technology, it's also about the people and the behavior and how you model both of them. So if you kind of look at it from that perspective and why it's important, I think that where I am right now, we're kind of taking a focus on solving it a different way. And that's been noticed by a lot of people. It's like, yeah, we've got to, rather than just doing endpoint protection, we're moving towards how do we actually protect the data that while it's being used. So if you think about this, when people break into your environment, they break into a company's systems, they usually have acquired credentials. And if you think about the traditional way of protecting data, it's at rest encryption, which is great. But if the user has permission to read that data, then the person who's stolen their credentials has access to it as well. And also, when you're transmitting the data, you transmit over the networks. We've had TLS for a bunch of different years, TLS 1.3, to be able to protect data when it's being transmitted. So you've got at rest, you have it when it's been transmitted. Nobody's actually dealt with, until we came along, nobody's dealt with how do you protect it while it's being used. So, for example, Kevin can only see this information in its redacted form or in its masked form, but Matt, however, has privileges and he can actually see the real plain text. If you actually put those controls into place and you actually have zero trust there, so nobody has access until you give them access, or asking it a different way, do your users really need to see somebody's social security number and date of birth just because it was designed into the system 10 years ago? Or do you actually want to stop them having access and actually tokenize that data so that when it's in use, even if somebody gets their credentials, they still don't access that data? So the long and the short of this is basically around, when you look at the way data has been protected before, it's putting up walls. You actually need to address the data at its core and figure out how do you actually stop people from seeing stuff they were probably never meant to see in the first place. But the way we developed systems in the past, we didn't really care about that. It's just like store the data in the database, let people pull out, username and password is good enough, and let's get going. And as we found over the years, that's not the case.
So then if they do manage to get through the wall, to use your analogy, and they get to the treasure room, what they actually have access or what they can do with the stuff that's in that room might make the fact that they got in there sort of trivial or not necessarily as impactful as if they had gotten into more of the traditional way of thinking.
The Trojan horse.
Precisely. That's exactly where my mind was going with respect to that.
Exactly. And that's the age-old principle. And it holds true today, as people are trying to get in through the wall. And once they're in there, they've got two choices. They can sit there and they just collect information to their heart's desire because nobody really knows they're there. There was a great example with one of the Nordic countries where a friendly power had actually broken into their systems. And they were just collecting information for years and years and years until another country came along and said, you do realize these people are actually in your systems. They're collecting your data. And then they went through the process of actually having to secure that down. So yeah, once they're in, and there's no real protection at that point once they're through that wall. And that's where the weak point still exists. And if you look at it, it's such a complex area, security typically. And that's why if you look at a Gartner map of the different vendors that are in this space across all the different levels of the stack, it's like a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. They're there for a reason, because it's too hard of a problem holistically. They said, let's focus on the network, or let's focus on individual things based at the malware level down on disk, or let's focus on a different area over here. And they don't think about it more holistically. I think the good thing is that our CEO has worked on security at Oracle. He helped bring out the Shield products at Salesforce. So he understands that he knew what the problems were. He was trying to fix all the stuff that didn't work before in a way that worked for everybody. And I think that's what doesn't work with endpoint security that we're actually addressing now. And he's actually had the foresight to say, let's fix all the problems that we've not been able to fix in the past.
Yeah, I think one of the key things about being a technology seller today is that you have to have a basic understanding of security in terms of, what does it entail? What does access mean? Where's the data stored? How is it encrypted? All these types of things. If you're a seller, if you're a technical person as well, you're not going to be the CISO, you're not going to be the security team, but you have to be fluent enough to be able to have these conversations because it permeates everything that happens from technology these days. If someone were just to get a basic understanding, realizing there's a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle of everything you learn, I mean, what are some of the fundamental things that you would emphasize that they at least understand so that you can have productive conversations anywhere in the sales cycle?
That's a really good question, Matt. And I think, honestly, it kind of goes down to it's less about the technology and it's more about the business pain and understanding what the problem you're trying to solve is going to be. And that's true for us because, as Kevin pointed out, it's a complex area. And as you pointed out, it is a complex area. Security, where do you start? Where do you focus on? If you can kind of get to a conversation with a customer, and this is not just true of security, this is across the board. And I do smile today when I actually read and say LinkedIn, all these different articles about, hey, we've got a chatbot for this, or we got Gen AI over here. And then you think about it, they're feeding all of that information into a vector database. And once it's in there, it's in there. It ain't coming out ever again, which is why you have the EU regulations for AI saying you can't put personal information in there. If you do, you need to scrap your entire model and start again from scratch. So with that in mind, and when you look at this, it's complex from the perspective that you need to understand all of these things, but down to, and I think a lot of sellers make this mistake, is that let's sell technology just for technology. And occasionally we'll bump into system integrators who do the same thing. I don't understand what all you guys do, but you've got a technology and it kind of fits in here. They're thinking about the problem from a technical fit perspective. Let's put this piece of the jigsaw into this place in this piece in the puzzle, rather than thinking about what is the customer trying to do? Are we actually solving his problems? Is he going to get business value from doing this? And why is he going to want to do this? What's his motivation for wanting to move forward with this? Does he have a compelling event? And we get into the sales side of how we actually sell this. So it's a complex area in AI today and all the other technologies that are booming, but nobody's thinking about security, or very few people are thinking about security around them. And it's when you've got to take a step back, and from my perspective anyway, and look at what's the problem we're actually trying to solve here with the customer.
Interesting. So we often say on this show, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Whether it's you're talking about data, trade secrets, or what have you, once the genie's out of the bottle, very hard to get the genie to go back in, yes?
Yes, very definitely.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying with respect to cybersecurity and how it's interesting. There's a lot of buzz about it, but people don't seem to be having particularly deep conversations, at least publicly, about what the implications of these topics that they're bringing up are. Is that just my perspective, or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think no, you're absolutely right. I don't think they understand the full implications yet. The technology is so new and the advancements are coming so thick and fast in terms of, hey, here's something else you can do. Here's a new thing we've done. Here's a different type of model we've developed. Here's a product we've put on top of this. And we are still doing now what we did 30, 35 years ago, which is back then it was like, hey, look at this. You can do a SQL query against the database and get results back. You don't need to write COBOL anymore. Now we have a much fancier front end. We actually put stuff into it and it comes back in a human readable form. They're thinking about, I can do this and you can access all this data, but people are still thinking about, here's the functionality. It's not kind of caught up with them yet about what are the implications of doing this. And it comes into security governance at that point. How are we governing all the information we have across our enterprise? And by feeding all of this information into one place, are we now making it accessible for people to actually come in and exploit it?
It's just interesting. Don't know. Yeah, definitely interesting. And as much as, the buzz these days is AI, and it seems to be almost a frenetic way that people are chasing that term in the marketplace these days, there are some folks that are talking about trying to bring AI to that conversation with cybersecurity in a very constructive way. What kind of exposure have you had on that front with respect to the potential of AI in a constructive way rather than a potential threatening way to the cybersecurity industry?
Really good question. I think the most pertinent answer to that question is I've had the opportunity to talk to university professors, obviously based around what I'm doing in cybersecurity. And in some of those sessions, they tend to honestly be a little bit myopic in terms of the way they look at stuff. And these are very, very knowledgeable people. And when I say myopic, it's like, no, you've got to use this particular technology, or it's really difficult to do something this way. Or maybe they just don't have visibility, say, to some of the stuff that we might be doing, although it's different in the way it does it and how we actually go about doing it. So I think that even if you look at some of these industry leading experts, some of which who were involved in building or being part of the AES algorithm for symmetric encryption, they still don't fully grasp the potential. They're doing research into it. They're trying to understand how can this be applied and how can it be used. But I still don't think that there's a chasm there that needs to be crossed. And we've just not got to crossing that chasm yet. And it's going to be a while. I think we're at the very early stages with this new AI revolution that we're in, and we will learn more and it will mature as we go along. But as with everything else, if you kind of look back, guys, if you think about, what it was like originally when the internet came along and client server arrived back in the day, it was all about, how do we actually move to this paradigm? Nobody thought about technology. Nobody even considered security. It's like, security in the internet? Why would you want to do that? Because everyone wants to share data. It's like, yeah, you want to share it, but you don't want people just come in there and like openly harvest this information out again. It's almost like, from a thought perspective, people put security on a back burner and they don't think about it so much until, oh God, now we've got to do it, which is usually at the point that if they have an application that's been long built and now they need to care about it, it's going to be a lot of work to actually think about how they start protecting it. And given the tools that they have out there, some of them they've got in place are walls, their endpoint security, and they rarely think about, how do we protect the data? Because from their perspective, thinking about it in a traditional sense, it is a very hard problem to solve. And that's why companies like the one I'm working with right now think about things in a different way. We kind of opened up the perspective to, let's give you an open layer of security and democratize this operation in a way that anybody can actually use it for any system that's out there. And that's the way people need to think. You need to think more open. How are we going to do this? But also, if you look at GDPR regulation, or even some of the later regulations that are coming out based around it in different countries, they talk about by default and by design. So basically, security needs to be built in at the core of whatever it is you're doing. It needs to be part of the underlying architecture, and it needs to be designed in there from scratch. It can't be a bolt-on afterthought. And that's how people need to think about security moving forward now.
Interesting you would say that, because as to your point, 15, 20 years ago, wasn't even a blip on the radar, or it was at least, it may have been a passing thought with folks. But now, a lot of the kids, I do a lot of mentoring. I know you do too, and you're engaging with folks at the university level on these topics. A lot of folks come up and ask our opinion about that relative to where they're going forward with their careers. What would you say to someone who's coming in, who's either looking to pursue from either the purely technical perspective or from the selling perspective in consulting world? They're looking to kind of get more into this because they see the potential, they see the opportunity for growth here. What would be some of the advice you'd give to someone who's looking to get into that aspect of the industry?
Every journey begins with a single step. Pick an area, start somewhere. Pick an area typically that if you're working somewhere and if it's of interest to you, you're going to make it part of what you do normally. You're going to make the time to actually learn something. It doesn't matter where you start. There's no right or wrong place to start unless obviously your company says, no, we need you to focus here. It's like, okay, let's kind of figure out how this is first. And then once you actually think about how you want to grow how far you want to take your knowledge and how you want to grow it. If you're technical, you can get really deep. If you're selling, you need to know certain things, but understand think about the implications outside of that. So think about what life is like, so to speak, outside of your pond. Get out of your pond and swim around in another pond, see what it's like over here, test the water out over here. So I think because technology is such a complex area now, and it clearly wasn't 30, 35 years ago, it was a lot simpler, and we had mainframes everywhere and life was what life was. Now there's so much stuff all over the place. There are so many different areas. It's impossible to get deeply technical or with any area short of working at a company or multiple different companies over multiple different years to actually acquire this knowledge. So just pick an area. Hopefully it's of interest to you, or hopefully it's something that you want to get into and branch out on. Start there and then move out and then branch out your knowledge and expand it. It's the best advice. That's kind of what I've done over the years, and it's kind of worked for me.
Well, your advice in terms of career development was very, very helpful to me back when we ran into each other, and I had the good fortune of being able to work with you back then. If there's anybody on the listening to the podcast today that would like to connect with you, get some of your perspectives on this topic or any of the topics we've talked about on today's session, what would be the best way for them to try and track you down?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me. I'm searchable based on my name, as you can see there. It is phonetically, as it sounds, spelt. So it's generally not that difficult. People look at it and run away, but most of the people are going, oh, yeah, it is phonetic. So no, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to connect to new people, and which I'm doing all the time, and also assist people. In fact, just recently I had actually with lunch, it was more like coffee, with a person who'd literally come out of the graduate program back in 2023 and kind of helped them grow their career where we are. They came out as an intern and then helped them with, growing their career out. They've now moved into a new company and they're doing extremely well. And it's really fundamentally heartwarming for me to see how they've kind of grown as an individual and how they've grown their career. And so I'm happy to help anybody out. As I've said to you and many other people in the past, want my help, just ask for it. I was like, if I've got the time and I can actually help you, I will definitely help you. I think more people should be like that. Make the workplace a happier place, I think.
Well, we do need to bring our episode to a close today. And I do want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing your perspectives. Fascinating stuff. You and I could do a whole podcast just on diving. But the cybersecurity spot was an area that I'm not necessarily as well versed in. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on our call here today.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that does bring us to a close on this week's episode. I do want to go and turn the floor over to Matt for a quick second. Matt, it was great talking to you. It feels like it's been forever since we got a chance to do one of these episodes. It was great talking to you today.
As always, Priyanta, thank you so much. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. You too.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you got as much out of today's podcast as Matt and I did, please take a moment, follow, subscribe, leave some comments, let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, and we'll make sure that we incorporate that into our upcoming shows. If you'd like to know more about the methodology and our philosophy on selling that Matt and I share, please come on to our website and buy a copy of our book about the MOVE framework. And you can follow along at home as we start talking about the different areas of our methodology and what has made us successful over the years as being sales engineers and leading sales teams. But with that being said, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for spending a little bit of time. Once again, thank you to my co-host and our guest. And with that being said, we'll see you next time. Take care.